Hi, Stephanie, and welcome to another episode of Curated Conversations. Thank you for joining Jasmine and I for this discussion. I mentioned to you before that in the Department of Culture National Heritage Plan Rollout Conference, I heard a very brief snippet of the work that you're doing. And obviously, with your background in art history, your focus on social and political art, I just thought that it would be incredible to have you as a guest here for our discussion. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here to talk with you about my work.
Awesome. So I think, a lot of our members may not be familiar with your current project right now. So maybe start there, sharing a little bit about, what exactly you're working on from a thesis PhD perspective and what you hope to do with that.
So my dissertation is on monuments of trauma and pain in Africa and its diaspora. And it's a case study project. So I'm looking at 5 case studies, 2 in the United States, 2 on the continent of Africa, and 1 here in Bermuda. I'm looking at sites of trauma and how those are being interpreted by museums or commissioners of monuments, and how they interpret those sites to help us move past the trauma that was experienced in those places. I came to that point through my interest in social architecture, specifically like the Bauhaus and their public housing projects. And I was like, oh, architecture can do really amazing things. And I came across these sites, and I was like, these are sites that are doing really amazing things. I'd like to look at them in more depth.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, and I think monuments are such a hot topic right now. You're like really capitalizing on something that is very important as a conversation, as a discussion point in this moment in time in architecture and art history. So I assume, do you look at Cecil Rhodes and what's happening in South Africa? Is that part of your, and looking from there at, I went to UVA, so I'm very well aware of what happened in Charlottesville. Are you thinking of bringing together, banding together these kind of similar topics?
I have been following what's been happening with Cecil Rhodes.
Yes.
I do not think I have the expertise to talk about that. Not because I'm not interested in monuments, because I feel like that's not my place as someone who is not South African.
Yeah.
But it would be intellectually dishonest for me to say that does not influence the work that I do. But I will also say that more, unfortunately for my work and for me being published, I do not look at monuments being teared down, but more so like what we do with sites of trauma and how we can use them to learn about our history and then moving forward. So the taking down of monuments is something I'm deeply invested in politically in my political life. But in my academic life, that's not something that I have written about. I've thought about it in depth. And if I had a million lifetimes, I would definitely write a book about it, probably in the next one.
There's still time, Stephanie. You've got plenty of time.
But
and I guess that's a good point. Yeah, there's so many ways that you can take that discussion, and so I think that a lot of the academic research, within the past couple of years has been focused on what's happening, and conversation has been around, what's happening with the taking down of monuments. So I think your particular targeted focus on, what's happening around monuments as, places of sites of trauma, right? So I think that that's like a different angle to it, which is fascinating, and is definitely a critical piece of history and how we look at, how we're acting in the present day as well. So,
yeah, I think it is really fascinating. And I used to write for Monument Lab that does some really interesting work in this space. And as I'm thinking, like as I'm mulling on this topic and conversation, I think that would be remiss to say that those two things aren't intertwined, right? I think when I think about my work, I think about it as like, these are stories that need to be told, and they have been overlooked for so long. And we need to highlight these spaces and the importance that they have in our culture, and specifically in Black culture. And I think that ties in with the idea of like, I'm going to mess this up. I'm going to paraphrase a JFK quote. And I think he says you can learn a lot about a culture by who they memorialize. And I think the idea that there are memorials to a losing side of a war is fascinating, and then to tie that in with the fact that there are people who deserve to be memorialized who have not been memorialized, I think is incredibly telling. And I guess I think of my work maybe as another side of the coin. Like, there are people who are working on ensuring that we are not deluding ourselves by heralding people who, in my personal opinion, should not be memorialized. And I think, but I see my work as making sure that as we do that, we also fill our monumental landscape with people and things that deserve to be memorialized or remembered.
Yeah.
So
No, that's such interesting. Yeah, such an interesting, focus area. And I think, I did read that you started out your career interests and thinking that you were going to move into journalism and politics, and then segued into art history. And now look at you, you're focusing on monuments. And it's such a great story, because I think so many students are like, where am I going to take my career, and how am I going to do this? And it's so interesting that you weren't expecting to go into art history in your undergraduate, degree, and then you kind of shifted into that, and that it's segued into, something that you're so passionate about. So maybe share a little bit more about that. I mean, how did you land there?
I totally forgot about that. I was like, that's a whole lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have always been interested in politics, and when I went to do my undergrad, do my undergrad studies, I thought I was going to be a foreign correspondent. And then I needed an elective to fill up, to like take some extra to fill up, like be a full-time student. So I needed an extra 3 credits. And art history was the only class that was available. And I distinctly remember my professor coming in and saying, like, by the time you're finished with this course, all of you are going to be art historians. And I was like, okay, this is just a really interesting class, but I don't think I'm going to make a whole career change. Cut to 3 months in, actually probably a month and a half in, I was like, this is amazing. Why did I not know that this is all that art history entails? And I was really interested in the connection between art and politics. And I found that I thought that the only way I could write about politics was by being a journalist. Then I found that there's an entire field of art history that is deeply interested in the connection between art and politics, and I found that to be extremely interesting to see how culture influences politics and how politics influence culture. And yeah, I changed my major like that semester, and I haven't looked back since. It's been great. I think that's also important to tell students not to like rule anything out, to take as many classes as you can. You'll never know what you'll fall in love with. And and also don't freak out if you don't know what you want to do with your
Mhm.
life, because I thought I did, and now I am doing art history, something I never even knew could be a sustainable career. I must say, I was not told that this is something you can make a career out of.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Go
think
ahead,
it's so
Jasmine.
cool. People sometimes like to put art in a box that it's just this decorative aesthetic
Mhm.
thing, but it can be so much more. It has so much power and capability to speak to our cultures and to different people's lived experiences, and that's inherently political.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really awesome that, you know, you thought politics was the answer, but here's just a different avenue or a different way to enter that conversation. And I think that's something really important to recognize. And you did that even in your time with BSOA, with the show that you guest curated there, you know, really introducing the community here, or just reminding them that art is a tool that can speak volumes. So I wondered if you had any, you know, fond memories of your time doing that show, or any artworks that really stood out to you when you did that.
Yeah, that was, I was extremely honored to be able to do that. And I really enjoy, like, my call to artists was just like, anything that you think is not talked about in depth here on island. And I loved how personally those artists took that call and were really digging deep within themselves to start conversations around things that need to be talked about. I think every single work that was part of that exhibition was really important. I don't want to pinpoint one in particular, because I think without one, the entire show would have been lacking. But I really, this is going to sound terrible, but I would come in like on like my lunch and like sit with Nzinga and just be like, so what have you heard people talk about? And she said that there are people who were upset with that show because they thought that we shouldn't highlight the things that are wrong in society, in our society. And that actually made me a little happy. I was like, oh, well, clearly this show is doing what I wanted it to do, which was to provoke conversation.
Mhm.
I mean, I apologize to anyone but like, I deeply upset. Like, if I deeply upset anyone, I'm really sorry. But if I am happy that it provoked conversation, and I'm happy that it got to highlight that art can do that. And yeah, that was the entire goal, was to inspire, or not inspire, encourage us to deal with topics that we've been avoiding as a society.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think to Jasmine's point, I mean, that's, you know, art is meant to be a catalyst for both the good and bad. And I love this idea that artists kind of sit on the periphery of society and look in. And so they give us this glimpse of this kind of outer world that's looking in and studying us, right? Because we're living it every day. We don't always step back and really think about what's happening. But I'm curious, if you were curating a show today, you know, given this past year, you know, what is there any type of topic that you'd be like, gosh, this is such a prevalent topic right now. You know, this is so important. Is there anything that comes to mind? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but
I mean, there are a million things I would love to highlight, and trying to I mean, this was also if I had like a budget that was
yes, no, yeah, just imagine
that
budget.
that was infinite. I think I would love to highlight voices of the oppressed. I think if we have learned anything in the past 15 or so to 18 months, I think it's that there are people whose voices have been marginalized for generations, centuries. And I would love to provide a space for their voices and perspectives to be highlighted. Like ideally, I think I would probably do it as like an anonymous, I would like curate it anonymously, because I don't think my voice should be centered. I mean, I don't think it would be but I just think I have learned so much over this past year and a half. And as an art historian, and I've been deeply struggling with how do I center the voices of the oppressed in my work, and what does that look like? And I still don't have the answers to that, but I think by just amplifying voices of people who are not heard or purposefully silenced would be that. And I guess to be like explicit about the people I'm thinking of people who are incarcerated, Indigenous artists, artists in places that continue to be colonized, in disabled voices, and members of the LGBTQ community, I think, and also racialized voices, of course. And that's something I've been struggling with as an academic, because I feel like we live in an ivory tower, and often are separated from what is happening on the ground. I hate to use a military term, but I think finding a way to center those voices is deeply important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one thing that Jasmine and I have talked about as well is that the museum world is changing, and that this old structure of one curator, you know, dictating what is shown in a museum, or, you know, by that and dictating what art and culture is that museums are becoming much more participatory. And I think that that's really an exciting space to think about with museums, and art museums in particular, because if you get the public involved in curating a show, you know, you are able to highlight different voices, because otherwise those voices get lost in the mix, as you know. So yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of, you know, where you see your career going, you know, you've got plenty of time, as you know, things change always. But is there any kind of goal that you've set for yourself from a career standpoint? I know you've got to make sure that you finish this big milestone in your life, but after that, any thoughts?
Yeah, I went into my PhD program wanting to be a professor, and that's something I still want to do. I think teaching is one of the things that like brings me great joy in life. I love being in the classroom, and I love inspiring others to hopefully become art historians, but or if not, at least be exposed to this world. Yeah, but I also desperately want the work that I write and the research that I do to be relevant. Yeah, I deeply think that if the work I'm doing is not relevant, or is not being like part of the conversation that's happening outside of academia, I've failed. So making work that I don't want to be too like wax poetic, but making work that is, I want to say inspiring, but I don't know if that's that's not the right word that I'm looking for, but making work that is relevant to, I was going to like quote someone, but I can't remember what the quote is. So like, I think he says the 3 C's: current, controversial, and consequential, is really important to me. So yeah.
Yeah. Jasmine, any final questions before we wrap up?
It's not really a question, but I did want to just commend and recognize. I didn't fully read them yet. I'm going to go back, but I took a look at the 2 articles that you wrote for Monument Lab about the Sally Bassett sculpture and about the GOMBEYs. And I really encourage anyone watching this video to definitely take a read, because I thought that the piece about Sally Bassett, especially, she's such an important part of our history that she hasn't really been given her full flowers. And so I appreciated that you took the time to really write about her and the importance of her monument. So definitely check those out. And your work is, starting to have those 3 C's already. So
thank you so much. Yeah, that piece, that Sally Bassett piece, is really special and close to my heart. I think she is deeply inspiring to me as a freedom fighter, and and I think circling back, I think she deeply deserves to be part of our larger monumental landscape. And I think that once again, who we memorialize says a lot about us as a country, a culture, and a society. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And, you said there at the end that you're hoping to, encourage others to get into art history and find their passion through the mode of visual culture. And so, we're supportive of you. We can't wait to, see your final PhD. And we know that your career is going to take you to many heights. So thank you so much for your time today. And, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to connect?
You can find me on Twitter. At sgibbles11. That's embarrassing. Or you can email me at, it's a really long one, s.michelle.gibson@gmail.com. I would love to hear from anyone. I think, I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to chat more about my work or their work or art in Bermuda in general.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was lovely. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you as well.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.